So I'll be speaking about Mastodon and Black Twitter today. Quickly, for those who wonder, I am a cartoonist in a different life also. So today, most of what I'll say today is going to be theoretical. So I haven't done the actual empirical work yet. This is something I'm working on. So at first, I'm going to start with platform theory. Then we're going to go into more Mastodon, then Black Twitter, and finally, we're going to talk about identity a bit more. So Mastodon was created in 2016 by Eugene Rocco. It's supposed to be a decentralized alternative microblog. It's part of the Fediverse. There's many other platforms, but Mastodon is the most well-known of them. And it's every instance is it's a federated system. So every instance is started by an individual or a group, and people can join that specific instance and share. One of the main purpose of Mastodon is that there is no oversight, there is no centralized control, there is no also data merchandising of commodification. I'm sorry, that's a word. Commodification of the data, of users' data, and surveillance by third parties. That's one of the main focuses of Mastodon. So that's why it's set up this way. It's also set up to easily block contrarian views and so on. So it's very easy to do that on Mastodon and so on. So some of the theory I'm going to be using today, we've looked at some of it already in terms of platform theory and so on with the DISH and all, but I'm also obviously oriented with Zubov's work on surveillance capitalism and the commodification of data and so on. So some of the theories I'm going to be using also, I'm going to draw a little bit more on the classic theory of platforms from Gillespie. So there's 4 types of platform according to him. There's computing spaces, elevated architectural structures where we sit on something, or this figurative space, and then this political space. So those are going to come back continuously during the talk today. So the platform society, like that was mentioned, I think I can skip that part since we had a very good coverage on that just a few minutes ago. But one of the things that's important with platforms is that there is an interaction with users, advertisers, clients. But what do I mean by clients? I mean companies who create third-party services, or even that can interact with the platform itself. So there's a interplay of those 3 components within the same platform usually. So another theory that I'm going to be using, which is going to come back very often, is what we call information practice. So it's information practice comes from information science. And there are 3 main information practices which we use usually. It's to search for information, to use information, which also means to protect it, to save it, archive, and so on, and to share that information, exchange it with other people. So this is a very common, well-known theory in information sciences. It's not usually known in other sectors, but it's very useful to understand what people do with the information that they find, especially online. So Mastodon was seen as a Twitter replacement. It was and its popularity obviously was in October 2022 after Elon Musk bought Twitter finally. And it's the finalized culture of what Mastodon is, I argue, is not stabilized in a classic STS sense. So the black box is not fully formed yet. We still have time to decide what Mastodon is going to be about. And we can see that interplay in a lot of the discussion when people were jumping on Mastodon in the fall 2022, where people were saying, Mastodon does this, it doesn't do that. You can do this on Mastodon, you can't do that. So there was a lot of negotiation that we were able to witness. I was watching all of this with great interest because it was so fascinating to see people negotiating and saying, you can do this with this platform, but you cannot do this. This is not the place to do this. We don't want this kind of politics here. We don't want this kind of messaging here. So it's a negotiation, and it's still happening right now. And this is something that the place of Black Twitter came up often in those discussions. It was really fascinating for me to observe that. So one of the barriers to Mastodon, its success will only come, obviously, if the mobile part is handled. That's just other research I'm doing on the side also, and also if the public also use it. These have been some of the two main barriers to the platform so far: mobile adoption, so being able to use the platform on a phone, and also obviously access by other publics that are not specialized professionals. So obviously, because it's a federated platform, no instance or server has control over others in theory. This is in theory. I have a lot of examples where we will see that some instances that do have control over other ones that we'll be discussing. Every community is a community of practice, you could say, where people join a particular group. Most scholars were some of the first to jump into Mastodon in mass. Many of us chose specific groups. Some people chose, in my case, I chose a group on usable security and human-computer interaction. This is the group I chose to join on Mastodon, which is quite different from Twitter, where on Twitter, I used to be myself, the cartoonist, the prof, everything else at once. On Mastodon, no, I'm associated with the human-computer interaction people. When I try to toot about other topics, I always feel a bit sketchy. Like, that's not what they expect me to. I'm supposed to stick with being a prof. I'm not supposed to talk about other things here. But I did not have this thing on Twitter. On Twitter, I could be whoever I wanted to be at any time. But this is interesting about Mastodon. It kind of forces people into a specific box. You have to be someone specific. Now, Black Twitter. What's interesting about Black Twitter? Black Twitter has been identified, has been researched for years, for decades, I would say. Since at least 2009, Black Twitter has been studied. It's a loose group of people of African descent and the diaspora that has a power similar to K-pop in terms that they can influence what trends on the platform, because there's a network effect of people tweeting about topics, which influences what everybody else sees trending. I would argue that Black Twitter is what we call a counter-public in Habermasian term, in the sense that it's not the main culture. It is a subculture within the group, a counterculture, I would say, but which also influences everything that happens on the platform, which we've seen. Examples of this, obviously, Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement, which were all started by people from Black Twitter, what we call call-outs, so exposing people who've done things, and obviously what we call cancel culture came directly from Black Twitter, in a sense. So it's very fascinating to see this. Also, specifically, Black Americans are overrepresented on Twitter compared to their representation in the overall American population, which means Black Twitter works mostly because of the oral nature of the platform. Tweets are short, so it's what we call an oral platform, similar to something like TikTok, where people it's not exactly writing a long text that matters or even showing images. It's really about speaking. So it's an oral platform. Twitter is known as an oral platform for that. Now, in terms of participative culture from Harry Jenkins, most of you would be familiar with this. We would say that people create contents. They're not expert, they're not professional, they're not producers, but they do create contents on Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, and so on. Some of those contents, which we'll see later, do not quite work on Mastodon, things like reaction videos, sampling of other material, memes, and so on. Practices which are really known for Black Twitter, like subtweeting, retweeting, and so on, are endemic to Black Twitter, and they're not things that are easy to do on Mastodon. So we can already see some of the barriers to the platform for that audience here. It's quite interesting. So obviously, the communities of practice that Mastodon has attracted first were academics, journalists, and even specific areas such as information security practitioner, InfoSec. So right away, they jump on Mastodon very quickly. And they were what we would call early adopters, not the first adopters, but early adopters and so on. Now, other population, other groups like Black Twitter, they know about Mastodon, but they haven't quite adopted it yet, or they tried to, and the regular public, the general public too. So I would argue that it's easier for communities of practice like academics, like ourselves, journalists, and so on, to adopt something like Mastodon than a group like Black Twitter. And so there is a problem of amateur and belonging on Mastodon where other people can see what you're doing, because it's such a decentralized platform that where do you go when you go on Mastodon? Which server do you jump on? And if you jump on a specific server, if all Black people jump on one server, isn't that going to create segregation of all those people on that server? Probably, which is not something we have with Twitter, because Twitter, you could go on Twitter, everybody's on Twitter. You'll have to block people. Mastodon was designed to be able to block things that you don't want to see, which is the opposite of what a lot of people from Black Twitter want to do. They want to spread their message. They want everybody to see it, and they want to see other things. They want to retweet, subtweet, and so on. And these are practices that are not very encouraged on Mastodon, which is interesting. Even simple search, you have to do search with hashtags. You can't just find things, what's happening, what's trending on Mastodon easily, because it's not, if it's not with a hashtag, you can't just do a quick search with most servers. So these things are impediment for Black Twitter's adoption of the platform, usually, I would argue. There's also usability barriers. Obviously, the first barrier would be to find the right instance. To use a platform, your information practices to find, use, and exchange information with other people is a very difficult thing to do. And obviously, the policies of every platform, every server on Mastodon is different. So to navigate this space could be complicated for some people. There is a general culture, general policies of all of Mastodon servers, and then there's one of the individual one that you adhere to. But as we'll see, the policies of a different instance can also affect the policy of the instance you're on. So this is an issue that people need to navigate and negotiate all the time. So, for example, what's acceptable with one instance may not be with another one. So if you tweet some words, if you tweet things, you may be blocked from another server, which means your entire server instance is going to be blocked if you post something that's unacceptable to someone else. It's happened many, many, many times. So it creates what we call in human-computer interaction a cognitive charge, where people have to think a lot of how can I put this here? So a lot of thought process is involved into just posting a message to not piss off someone somewhere, which is obviously, it's a lot of energy for a community that's used to just posting quick messages, quick oral messages, to actually have to think a lot about these things before even posting something. So that's a barrier in terms of how to use a platform. The message are not broadcast to everybody, which means if you have your friends on a different server, they won't see it easily. So the network, what we call the network effect, doesn't happen on Mastodon as easily as on Twitter, where everybody could just see, oh, this is trending, okay, I'll just retweet this, and so on. Because people are split across several instances. What we call homophily, which is in a network analysis terms, is how similar are people, means that this is with whom you're going to associate with. Homophily plays a big role in which instance you pick. Like I said, sometimes we have different identities, but in my case, for example, I pick the one for academics. I let go of everything else. The cartoonist part, I'm not touching that anymore. I'm just an academic here, and so on. So this might be an issue for many users who do think that they have multiple identities or interests and so on. So it kind of blocks those people sometimes. And Black Twitter is very amorphous. So it actually is an heterophilic group, which means there might be people from the Caribbean, European descent, Canadian, Americans, and so on. Within those groups, there might be people of different languages, English, Dutch, German, French, and so on, different gender, age, location, social status, interest, education, and so on. So Black Twitter is not one single group. It's a combination of several small groups which kind of mingle and network together often. So, and it doesn't mean that everybody on Black Twitter has to be Black either. And it doesn't mean that every Black person has to be part of Black Twitter either. For example, I don't consider myself part of Black Twitter, and so on. So there is no self-identifying label of who's part of Black Twitter or not. It's very amorphous. It's mostly based on the network effect. In terms of network analysis, it's usually, we look at who's connected to whom. So who has a tie with whom and so on. We can measure these things in terms of who retweets whom, who follows, who likes, and so on, who subtweets, and so on. This is usually how we determine a network, who's connected to whom, and so on, by those interactions, and so on. So for topics, people might be interested in things like Black Lives Matter, but not in the Olympics and so on. And it really depends. In terms of homophily, heterophilia, and so on. So identity is not defined by occupation. It might be defined by experience and overlapping values that people may have. So this is an issue with Mastodon because we didn't have that with Twitter per se. On Twitter, people could have various overlapping experiences and values and so on that could be in just one place. This is not the case with Mastodon, where you're forced into being part of one group in particular. In terms of identity with Mastodon, it's easy to block a whole instance that is counter to the public, to the greater mass of Mastodon users. It happens all the time. There's a specific Mastodon instance art, the one for artists, which is very proactive in blocking almost everything. So some people are actually flocking from that instance because they block everything. But what happens with some of those instances is that if they find that another instance has not blocked a specific group fast enough to their taste, they will block them too. So there's a constant pressure to block almost everybody on Mastodon. It's kind of funny. And some things that Black Twitter likes to do, like use some vernacular and some slurs. Some people on Black Twitter use specific slurs. These things would be completely blocked if they did that on Mastodon. So they would block the entire instance. So you can see how this is not encouraged. So I would say Mastodon's architecture was created to protect users and prevent data commodification. It was also created to protect specific communities from negative contents, like the transgender community and so on, far-right and LGBT communities and so on, to protect them from specific materials. It's very good at doing that, but it's also blocking everything else at the same time. So it's a very stringent platform in that sense, which is probably what would block adoption of the platform. And so moderation is a constant issue on Mastodon. If the moderation is on a specific instance is not done fast enough, they will be blocked by other instances. So what I would say in the end is that it's not very easy to have heterophilic profile on Mastodon as it was on something like Facebook, where you could have multiple identities. Even some of the things which some communities outside of Black Twitter thought that would be supported on Mastodon, for example, the transgender community using GoFundMe for help in financing their lives and so on. It happens all the time. This is also frowned upon on Mastodon. It created several debates a few months ago when several people of the transgender community were asking for money to pay for their rent and so on. This is something that happens all the time on Twitter. But on Mastodon, some people are like, no, we don't want that here. So even those communities were meant to be protected by Mastodon are being kind of pushed aside because of a practice that's not accepted there sometimes. And even artists showing their portfolios and soliciting work are being so, well, you're commercial. You're trying to sell us things here. And this is also frowned upon on Mastodon. So in the end, what I would say is the values of Mastodon may not be geared for non-professionals, because non-professionals also get involved in selling some of their custom-made work and so on, art and so on. And there's work that needs to be done with the team at Mastodon to try to maybe open up a little bit more, so that not just Black Twitter, but a lot of other communities may thrive on the platform beside the technical aspect, because without this, the platform will not be adopted. And that's what I had to say. Thank you.